Welcome, everyone. We are grateful that thou hast lended thy ear to the Round Table podcast. The Knights of the Round Table intend to discuss modern issues through the eternal wisdom of the Bible and encourage others in these uncertain times. Consider following us and sharing the podcast with as many brothers in Christ as possible, and most importantly, enjoy thyselves.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Round Table Podcast. So, this has been a much-awaited episode, and it revolves around the question, is Christmas pagan? To some of my regular listeners, you might see me post stuff on Facebook, videos, and whatnot, arguing for the case that it is not. And so, that is factually true. You know, it's not so much my opinion or my belief that that Christmas is solely Christian and not pagan, but apparently more so than what I believed before. Once I actually looked at the evidence, is that most of if not all of Christmas modern traditions can be traced back to some form of the original Christian Christmas. So, let's get into it. First off, let's go over like several different arguments where people will say, oh, it's, Christmas is based off of Yule from the Norse people, which is a pagan holiday, or Saturnalia of the Romans, or Sola Inventus, or Sola Invictus. So we will be going over all those, and I'll explain why it is not. And of course, I will leave a link probably in the description of this podcast episode to a video from Wesley Huff. If you haven't heard of this guy, he's an amazing guy. He's, a genuine scholar, biblical scholar, and he has an amazing YouTube channel where he does all these cool videos about where he actually tracks historical evidences for pretty much everything. So if there's like some kind of biblical arguments, or if there's some sort of argument such as this about Christmas being pagan and not Christian, he has a whole video on that, which I'm inspiring some of that. I'm going to steal some of his information just because it's so good, and he cites all of the original sources of our earliest and actual sources. Because if you look up just on Wikipedia or even some normally good sources for history information, a lot of the authors will be just misinformed and not cite their sources and talk about how, Christmas is inspired by, paganism and stuff like that. So don't listen to that. Go listen to Wesley Huff and his YouTube channel that I'll leave in the description, and specifically the video about Christmas. And because he looks at the actual facts from actual historical writing from people of the time that tells otherwise. So I think we can start with Yule. If you don't know what Yule, there's some Christmas songs talking about Yuletide gay or something like that. But yeah, that it was a Norse holiday, and some people like to say, oh, because Yule has some association with Christmas, it is therefore directed from Christmas and stuff like that, and hence paganism. And that is a stupid argument because it's not factual. Even though, yes, Yule is kind of mixed with Christmas, there's a reason for that, and it's not the reason you think. So, I have an actual source from here. Let's see if I can pronounce this. His name is Snorri Sturluson, and he was an actual historian from the... I need to grab the actual dates, but basically from the early 5th century, which means the 400s, and he wrote about Norse kings, and he wrote down history based on the sources that they had at the time. So he is our earliest source for a lot of stuff about old Norse kings from a lot older dates. So he has this one article about King Haakon, who is famously known for being, bringing Christianity to the Norse people. and being a devout Christian, stuff like that. Cool guy. But one of the coolest things was what is recorded in his book. This author, Snorri Sturluson, he has a book called The History of Kings of Norway. And in that book, you can go look it up for yourself, there is a chapter, it looks like, let's see, looks like chapter 15 of, let's see, when it starts talking about Hakon the Good's saga. And what that does is it breaks down pieces of history into different sections. And there's you can go to Gutenberg.org, and they have his book online, and you'll be able to see, word for word what he wrote. And the saga of King Hakon the Good, which is historic, he claims that right here, if I can find it, all right, right here, where he promotes and brings Christianity to the Norse, to Norway specifically. So I'm going to cite a direct quote from his thing, and it says this. Quote, "He made a law that the festival of Yule should begin at the same time as the Christian people held Christmas, and that every man, under penalty, should brew a meal of malt and ale, and wherewith they kept Yule holy as long as it lasted, blah, blah, blah." So there's a lot of talking about Yule as a holiday, and as a lawmaker, King Hakon changed the law, indicating that Yule, as the pagan holiday, was on a separate date, and he moved it to coincide with Christmas that was already existing with Christianity, because he was a Christian himself, and he wanted to kind of mix it all together to promote faithfulness and stop, sacrifices and stuff like that. So, really cool. And that's also the earliest source we have from what he claimed was in the 4th century. And so is the earliest source we have to exactly the correlation between, when it all started, when Yule got mixed with Christmas. And Christmas was already on December 25th before Yule was. There's about, I think like a century gap or more that it beats it by, because Christians were already celebrating Christmas on December 25th. And the reason for December 25th, some people like to say, is because, winter solstice and all that stuff. But we also don't have any early sources from the ancient world that talk about winter solstice being on December 21st, except for the Julian calendar that does say December 25th is the winter solstice. But also, it's conflicting, because the Romans couldn't really agree on the subject, because Pliny the Elder also says that it was on the 26th, and let's see if I can pronounce this name, Columella says it was on December 23rd. So it was not even, apparently, by 3 different Roman historians, or whoever did the Julian calendar, they couldn't agree on when exactly the solstice was. So, and it has no correlation to Christmas starting on that day. So, in addition to the fact that, the whole claim of the winter solstice and Yule does not, really apply historically, now we have to look at Sol Invictus, or Saturnalia. So, here's some sources that I found on that. Let me see if I can pull it up right here. So, Saturnalia was never on December 25th. Now, I'm going to butcher this name, but there's another early historian, the oldest source we have, from Macrobius, who is, here, let me pull up his thing. He was a Latin grammarian and philosopher whose most important work is the Saturnalia, the last known example of the long series of symposia headed by the Symposium of Plato. See, I already can't pronounce these words, but the point is, it was during the 1400s, so pretty old ancient source, And by that point, Christmas was already a thing. And what he documents, Macrobius, is that Saturnalia was 14 days before the 17th of December, using a Roman calendar dates. According to Roman calendar dates, it was the 17th of December. So, based on 14 days before January. So, he says it lasted for 3 days. So it didn't, 3 days after the 17th is 20th, so not the 25th. So once again, Saturnalia has Saturnalia, Yule, and the winter solstice does not line up with Christmas because it was already a Christian holiday at the time. So now we have Sol Invictus. It was not placed on December 25th either until 354 AD when I'm going to butcher these names, when the Philocalian calendar records this, but doesn't specify any festival with regards to sun worship, which is another argument that people say, Sol Invictus was for, the sun god worship and stuff like that, and how because Christmas is also on December 25th, that means, paganism and all of that. But there's really no early source that we have of that, because prior to 354 AD, you had Christians celebrating Christmas. So that argument kind of falls apart too. And also, there's also a lot of inconsistencies as far as dating, because same with the winter solstice is because it was moved to December 25th, but originally was, let's see, right here, August 8th, 9th, and 28th and December 11th, and maybe October 19th. The Philocalian calendar says Emperor Aurelian honored the sun with chariots races every 4 years, October 19 through 22. So, once again, sun god worship on Sol Invictus isn't even accurate, but especially Sol Invictus being the start of Christmas is also, that's just not true, because the early sources contradict that statement. The problem is you need to be very careful when reading websites, because they will say, stuff contrary to the facts, just because either they're ignorant and they're not doing their what they should be doing, which is citing their sources and using actual historical evidence for their claims. Because when you make a claim and claim it's the truth, then you have the burden of evidence. And so you need to provide that evidence and make that known, which is what I'm trying to do here. To provide sources so you know that my claims have a basis. So that's as far as like the date of December 20th. Also, December 25th was commonly believed based on because Jesus was essentially a prophet. Of course, he was more than a prophet. He's the Son of God and God, the invisible God incarnate. But as far as like other prophets and holy people go, the ancient culture believed, ancient Jews and whatnot, and ancient Christians believed that you would be you would die, you would be born 9 months after you would be born 9 months after you died, or something like that. There was some correlation between the 9 months, and so when you count forward 9 months from March, I believe it is, then you get December, and so that's where December 25th actually came from. Was actually the Christians and or Jews trying to figure out. I mean, we don't know for certain exactly when Jesus was born, like the exact dates, but we know for a fact that the reason why we do it on December 25th, that too has Christian origin. That is not there's a reason behind it. So it's not necessarily fair to say, paganism. Also, there's some lesser little traditions, folk traditions, that arose in the modern day, usually, as early as like the 1600s and stuff like that, and 1800s, for stuff like mistletoe and Santa Claus and whatnot. So Santa Claus can be traced down to Dutch immigrants in New York in the early 1800s. Of course, this came from the Dutch word Sinterklaas, which means Saint Nicholas. Saint Nicholas, the Catholic priest. So you can look up Saint Nicholas and his work and why he was the foundation that brought about the Santa Claus legend, which is really interesting. But anyway, his feast day was on December 6th and was moved to December 25th around this time, that the 1800s, to help Christmas and be a family holiday and more popularized and stuff like that. So then like newspapers promoted it and encouraged to give gifts on Christmas instead of the New Year's like it was traditionally was before. And Sinterklaas, aka Santa Claus, aka Saint Nicholas, was rebranded by a Catholic priest to look like a traditional Dutchman from the time period, which include the big red suit and stuff like that. After this, Santa Claus was exported around the world into different countries. It started getting different cultures started putting their own spins on it, stuff like that. And so stuff like, I'm going to butcher this name, but the Jolupuki, I'm probably not pronouncing that, but anyway, it was an old pagan deity, and so they kind of mixed that with the Santa Claus figure because it was popular, because Christmas was really popular. So it's not a thing where like, oh, Santa Claus is directed to all these other pagan deities. No, they're not. Okay, they're not. There's no evidence for that. The closest evidence we have is from Saint Nicholas. That's literally where the name comes from. Saint Nicholas, who is a Catholic priest. So that thing falls apart too. But one of the biggest things is the Christmas trees. So the claim is that Christmas trees, find their origin in pagan Druid practices and stuff like that, with pine trees and all that really stuff. But Christmas trees only go back to the 16th century in Eastern Europe. The first mention of Christmas trees is in Alsace, France, and that was like an ordinance from 1561. Almost no early pagans thought of pine trees were sacred. Usually that was oak trees. So evergreen trees like fir trees and pine trees, what we make Christmas trees out of, were never tied to like anything sacred with pagans, and there's no early sources of that. There's of course trees of course were worshipped and deified and stuff. Pagans did a lot of stuff with trees, but specifically not fir trees and pine trees. It was mainly oak trees that was more sacred to them and stuff like that. You have the story of Saint Boniface cutting down the big oak tree that the pagans were worshiping because it was like the tree of Thor or whatever. And then in fact that is also one theory source of the Christmas tree origin is because after Saint Boniface cut down the oak tree, essentially symbolizing how he's cutting down a stupid pagan ritual, is he sanctified, I think it was some kind of fir tree or one of those evergreen trees, and saying, hey, this can represent Christ or something like that. So there's a lot of we do things like that to represent stuff that is spiritual, but that has no ties to paganism necessarily. And one early source that I've heard of, as far as actual documentation, other than Alsace, France, is during the medieval era, you would have the paradise trees. And basically what that means is they would it was in winter, of course, during Christmas, and they would put, they would do an Adam and Eve play, because Adam and Eve's feast day was on Christmas Eve, or at least, during that time. Whether or not it was called Christmas Eve, the point is it was on December 24th, I believe. And so for this Adam and Eve play, they would need a tree to symbolize the tree of life. But then, of course, you just had the evergreen trees in the winter in the medieval Europe. And so they're like, okay, we'll grab some evergreen trees and decorate them with, fruit and apples and whatnot to symbolize this tree. And, that isn't also one of the earliest records we have of actual, a Christmas decorating of a Christmas tree during that time for Christmas. So, again, there's no actual solid evidence. There's a lot of suspicions, but there's not actual evidence to support the fact that, a Christmas tree is pagan. And to that, some people will bring up, there is a verse in the Bible, it's in Jeremiah 10, verses 1 through 7. You can read it for yourself if you would like. And it basically says this: "You people, O Israel, listen to what the Lord has to say to you. The Lord says, do not start following pagan religious practices. Do not be in awe of signs that occur in the sky, even though the nations hold them in awe. For the religion of these people is worthless. They cut down a tree in the forest, and the craftsman makes it into an idol with his tools. He decorates it and overlays it with silver and gold. He uses hammer and nails to fasten it together so that it will not fall over. Such idols are like scarecrows in a cucumber field. They cannot talk. They cannot talk. They must be carried because they cannot walk. Do not be afraid of them because they cannot hurt you, and they do not have any power to help you." So, some people will throw out the scriptures, hey, you're bringing a tree into your house and whatnot, and so therefore it is, idol worship. But that is not in the context of what this is talking about. This is talking about clearly making an idol out of the tree. So carving it into, carve idols. Hence why it says, your idols are like scarecrows. They cannot walk. They cannot talk, and they cannot walk, hinting at the fact that, you carve eyes and make it look like some kind of human or some kind of physical creature, but it can't do nothing. It looks like something physical, but it can't walk, it can't talk, it can't help you, and it's also no threat to you. So the big point is, don't make idols like the pagan religions do. But guess what? You're not carving an idol out of a Christmas tree. You're just cutting down a tree and sticking it in your house for decoration. It is not. It has no correlation to this. This is Bible taken out of context, which is something that we should stay away from, because that is very dangerous to take scripture out of context. So that Bible verse doesn't even apply, because we're not carving idols out of Christmas trees, and we're also not treating the Christmas trees as idols. We are simply using them as decoration. In fact, like I said before, the earliest sources we have for Christmas trees are Christian in origin. So I would encourage you to look for it yourself, but be very careful. I would look at people like Wesley Huff and his videos online, because he actually cites his sources very well for these different pagan traditions. And he's made, tons of videos, especially about, all sorts of accused holidays and pagan traditions, and Christmas specifically. So I will leave a video and his YouTube channel in the comment section, in the description of this episode. So I would encourage you to look them up for yourself, because get your information from someone that knows how to cite their sources, not from all these Wikipedia. Even as much as I like Britannica.com and History.com, they are not very good about citing their sources. And especially when it comes to religions in general, especially Christianity, they are very false. And unfortunately, that's something that is going to happen. There's going to be falsities and people leading people astray, either out of ignorance or, intentionality. So the point is, be careful where you're getting your information from. Go to original sources from the ancient world as your basis for your beliefs. As far as Yule and Saturnalia and Sol Invictus and all these different pagan holidays, they were not, popular, because Christianity was on the rise and Christmas was taken over. And, it's more likely than not that the pagans would want to, such as Yule, to move their holidays to Christmas, and same with Saturnalia, to coincide with Christmas, to get more popular, to kind of play off of the fame that was coming to Christianity, because Christianity was expanding so rapidly. So it is not a sin to celebrate this holiday of Christmas, because it is not pagan. In origin, it is not pagan. Sure, there are other pagan festivals, maybe in December. However, they have no correlation to Christmas whatsoever. And sure, there's a lot about Christmas that has been secularized, such as Santa Claus and presents and all this stuff. But that is what the secular world does. It distorts the meaning of Christmas. And that's something, unfortunately, that a lot of us fall prey to, is the busyness of the season and losing track of what really matters. And that is the birth and death of Jesus Christ, but especially his birth. Because if he wasn't born, he wouldn't be able to die for our sins, now would he? So, it is something worthy of celebrating. And some people might argue, if the festival or holiday is not mentioned to be celebrated in the Bible, then I'm not going to celebrate it. Which I think is a stupid argument, considering that just because it's not mentioned in the Bible does not mean you can't do it. Especially because there's stuff worthy of celebrating that the Bible is just not going to mention. Because, the Bible has more important things to talk about than, these different festivals and whatnot. Like all the ones that you're allowed and not allowed to do. Use your own judgment. Figure out why you're celebrating and what you're celebrating for. For instance, Halloween. I did some episodes about that and Reformation Day and stuff. So from now on, Halloween is not Halloween for me. It's Reformation Day. And that's what I'm going to be celebrating. And that's what's something worthy of celebrating, unlike Halloween. So, same with Christmas. Christmas is worthy of celebrating. And even though it might not be the exact day when Jesus was born, it is, the best guess from the ancient world. And so it's not rooted in paganism. And you can rest assured that Christmas is not pagan, because a lot of people online, especially on social media, will say it and, from an outside perspective, maybe sound like they're making sense. But, if they're not citing their sources, reputable sources, actual people from the time that knew what was going on, such as, what's his name? Snorri Sturluson. And that's what we're supposed to base. If we're going to have like a logical argument and claim something, you have to be able to back it up with evidence. And, anyway, hope you enjoyed this episode. I would definitely encourage everybody that, yes, there is a lot of secular things about the holiday that looks pagan from the outside, but that's not because of paganism, that's just because of secularism. So focus on what really matters, and don't lose sight of all that with just the hustle and bustle. And it's going to happen, We're going to get distracted by this world. That's the world's mission, is to distract us from worshiping God and celebrating Him. And that's what's important. So I would encourage you to celebrate Christmas, but of course, follow your convictions. If you just don't want to celebrate Christmas, that's okay. But you cannot make the claim that it's pagan, and you can't use that as a reason. You could, it just wouldn't be a valid, logical reason. Anyway, I hope y'all enjoyed, and I'll see y'all in the next episode.